Hello, guys. My name is Daniel Anderson, and I'm going to be talking with you briefly on a topic that I want to title No Longer Lost in the Shuffle. We'll be looking at a new way to approach teaching our students with disabilities. My name is Daniel Anderson, and it is a pleasure to be afforded this time to speak to you from my position as an educational professional. I received my bachelor's in English education and my master's in school building leadership from NYU in 2003 and 2010, respectively, both of which allow me to view the functioning of the school from a broader perspective. I became a mother during my second year of teaching, and this helps me to identify with the hopes and fears that many parents live with. While my daughter doesn't have a disability, I do. And I was fortunate enough to have experienced being educated in both public and private schools prior to going to university. I have experienced the wonderful parts of schooling and have encountered some of the less favorable aspects of the system that marginalizes the disabled population, children and adults alike. I have been working in the public sector as a middle school English teacher for the last 17 years, and I have held a number of leadership positions over the years. Worth mentioning is the time I spent as department chair, because of how it framed my understanding of the support teachers need in addressing the needs of their students with disability. While I am a general education teacher, I also facilitate classes with students with disabilities. Most of these students have what is called an IEP, an individualized education program. As a result, I have an awareness of things to consider in educating this population. I understand the concerns parents have regarding the quality of education that their children receive. I understand the pressures placed on educational professionals in satisfying the demands of meeting the needs of all students. And I understand how hard it is for school leaders to make critical decisions in serving all demographics of students. I won't presume to know all of the answers, nor will I pretend to know all of the factors that are to be considered. What I am offering is a perspective of what gaps exist in providing a truly individualized educational program and suggestions for a different approach to meeting the needs of our students with disabilities. Recently, I was required to take an equity training workshop for work. I was excited to see that this idea of leveling the playing field was on the minds of the school system. Much to my dismay, the training addressed every group with which people identify without mentioning the disability community. For an entire group of people who work and learn in the school system, to be left out of the conversation was disheartening, to say the least. It left me wondering how effective we will be in educating our students with disabilities if we can't even acknowledge all of the populations we serve or the barriers they face. The time has come to take steps to educate our students with disabilities in an equitable way. Students with disabilities are protected under the federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which outlines the protections, rights, and resources for students with disabilities. This sounds quite simple enough on paper, but the execution of the law is proving to be difficult for many states. In New York City, as the 2019 schools transitioned to remote learning, the DOE, Department of Education, admitted to having 9,670 open hearing cases against the organization for its failure to comply with the federal disabilities and other applicable laws. All things legal aside, we know that a truly free and democratic society should allow all citizens the opportunity to maximize their potential. When we fail to provide students with disabilities with equal access, or we marginalize them and subject them to substandard practices, this does not align with our ideal that all students have the opportunity for an equal education. Let's talk about the current landscape of education for students with disabilities. Within the public school system, we have students with severe disabilities who are in their own district. We also have students with disabilities who are in a traditional school setting, but are in smaller, self-contained classes, primarily interacting with their disabled peers. And then we have students with disabilities who attend classes with their non-disabled peers. Let's think about our students with disabilities who follow the general education curriculum with the expectations that the teachers will modify the curriculum and methods to give these students equal access to success. Worth noting, here's some points to consider. Students with disabilities are likely to be pulled out of class for related services like speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and other services, which leaves many students out of the loop when they return to the classroom. They are at risk of falling way behind their classmates. Students with disabilities sometimes have a paraprofessional who travels with them to their classes and who is expected to support the student in accordance with their IEP provisions. Some classes have two teachers, a general education and a special education teacher, with the expectation that the SPED teacher bridges the gap to support the students with the IEPs. Students with disabilities who are in general education classes follow the same programming schedule as their peers, and they're grappling with the same concepts and standards, though the content, the materials, activities, and the products may be modified or should be modified. As it now stands, there is work to be done in figuring out what a successful education program looks like. Remote learning is providing an opportunity for us to revisit and to revamp. As the world figures out its new normal amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, the education sector has to revisit student performance, evaluate their efficiency, and begin redesigning how we teach with intentionality. It is no longer just students with disabilities who are finding it hard to learn in a remote setting, but they are dealing with more compounded issues due to their disabilities and the type of accommodations they may need. According to a frustrating parent trying to support their special education child, Lansfield's class schedule looked a lot like a regular one, but shorter. Up to 8 classes per day, followed by office hours with teachers and homework due later that night. She went on to say, the intense all-day schedule was not working for my son, who struggles with organization and time management issues. The multiple shortened class periods made it difficult to absorb information and understand exact expectations. We have all been there, right? We have experienced the difficulties of having to shift our brains from one task to another and the challenges to keeping up with assignments. Imagine what this is like for students with disabilities and the teachers who work with them, often in isolation. So I have a proposal for you. We call this the single core subject day. I propose breaking away from this rigid and disjointed way of scheduling academic classes. Over the course of a week, students spend anywhere between 3.5 to 7.5 hours in each academic class, depending on if the sessions are 45 minutes, an hour, or 90 minutes. For this illustration, I think 4 hours is sufficient time. In the afternoon, students would take one arts-based class for no more than an hour and a half. They can spend the last hour of the school day in one of the many community building groups that offer students a safe space to exchange ideas around issues the members of the group have and to share achievements. Let's look at the benefits for the stakeholders with the single core subject today. Taking a single core subject each day allows the students to be immersed in learning concepts in depth for an extended period of time, with 1 to 2 teachers to support and guide them, which brings them closer to mastery. They would no longer have to spend their days being the jack of all trades and being the master of none. They would no longer lose time by transitioning to different classes and wouldn't have to adjust to 8 teaching styles in one day. Each teacher has a chunk of time to thoroughly engage with the content and to employ a variety of pedagogical and teaching moves in a seamless way. They can design learning activities that move students through the learning objectives with a combination of direct instruction, group processes, individual conferences aimed at addressing unfinished learning, developing key understandings, and extending thinking around the concept. Teachers can get a more accurate gauge on where students are, evaluate them for gaps in the moment, and determine what next steps are required to get students to their next level. This occurrence of being pulled out of classes for related services and its impact on learning would decrease, because these can be scheduled in the afternoon sessions or on the designated non-academic days. Learning tends to happen better when students are fresh, and their ability to focus on academic wanes in the afternoon. This is the ideal time for students to receive their related services and to engage in the arts and health curricula, including advisory sessions geared towards social emotional learning and character development. These sessions would be shorter and more frequent as the schedule permits, maybe about an hour and a half. Parents would have fewer instances of helping their children through completing a task after the school day has ended. Instead, their children can spend their evenings using technology-based games that reinforce the concepts they learned earlier that day. There would be more ease in facilitating their children's learning, and they would see them make large gains in understanding and applying the learning. School leaders will begin to see a positive shift in student achievement and an improvement in staff performance and morale. With a pragmatic approach to building the capacity of faculty and fostering cross-curricular planning, administrators will find it more efficient to evaluate teacher performance, schedule time to provide authentic support to teachers, and to facilitate the conversations in the different team meetings. Working with only one group of students each day provides teachers with the time to not only gather and disaggregate data, but they can have the afternoon sessions for data-driven planning of learning activities and engaging in discussions across content areas, across grade levels, with related service providers, and even with families. What this really means is a smoother, more connected way of teaching the whole child, and puts us as educators within reach of actually individualizing education for our students while having the input of all stakeholders. In closing, we cannot uphold our ideals of society if we only guarantee the rights of students with disabilities on paper. It's time to put our money where our mouth is and provide learning opportunities that satisfy our legal and moral obligations. In 2019, New York City saw an 8% spike in the amount of money it had to put out to settle special education lawsuits brought by parents in the last fiscal year compared to the prior fiscal year. In fiscal year 2018, which ended June 30th, 2018, the city paid a whopping $303 million compared to $297.9 the year before. To think that we could have redirected these funds to addressing the inequities so that parents don't have to go to these extremes to get what they rightfully deserve for their children. We cannot meet our moral and legal obligations until we address the needs of our most needy student population and often the most marginalized group in our society. It is wiser to make provisions to level the landscape of education because everyone benefits. Denying any child access to a fair education negates our claims of being a progressive country that does more than pursue happiness, but actually creates the environment for self-actualization to occur, disabled or not. We can no longer sit around hoping that things will get better, nor can we simply complain without result. We can start combating the longstanding inequities for students with disabilities by investigating how we can use scheduling to maximize learning opportunities. There will be many other things we can try, but until we find the magic elixir, I ask you to think outside of the 8-class day box and start the work around the single core subject today. Thank you for your time. And thank you for being engaged in this work. It is important because our students with disabilities are important.